I'm Frank Caruso, and welcome to a brand new episode of Oregon Live. We're here at the Kickback Cafe in downtown Oregon, and we're going to revisit a person we interviewed before, Ken Anderson. And as I got to talk to Ken a little bit more, I found out more of his amazing secrets. So we're going to be flying high in the sky with Ken in this episode of Oregon Live. So enjoy.
I first got my pilot's license in 1983. I had flown out east with my boss who owned his own plane, and so he let me take the controls and showed me some of the instruments and gauges, and so I was hooked. I really enjoyed it. So when I came back, I signed up for flight school at that time Frickleton Aviation in Madison, and I was 34 years old at the time. And I had a young instructor named Tanya Cunningham. She was probably 20, 21, but she was a good instructor. And I got my license and I flew for several years, but then it got to be kind of expensive. We had other expenses, and I was working full-time and I was on call. So, you carry a beeper and then you have to call in right away. So it was kind of a hassle to try to get in enough time. So I quit flying. And then in 2011, I was retired and financially we were pretty stable. So I went back to flying. I got a flight instructor and went out for a few hours of instruction, just wearing off the rust. And so I've been flying ever since. I really enjoy flying over along the Wisconsin River, following Wisconsin River down. And I've also flown along the Mississippi, flew over to Prairie du Chien and then down to Dubuque. And that was really an awesome flight. You get to see so much of the river, and it's along the Mississippi. Of course, you have trains going along there. You've got barges, and it's just so many things to see along the river. During my flight training, you go up and with the flight instructor for quite a few hours of practice, and you do a lot of ground school. And then when your flight instructor feels confident that you can fly the plane yourself, then they let you solo. So Tanya and I flew up to Baraboo, and then she got out of the plane and she had me do 3 landings by myself. So the first time climbing out alone, there was nobody next to me to help out. But by that time, I was so sure of myself that I wasn't really afraid at all. I was pretty confident that I could handle it, and I did. And so then there was quite a bit more training after that before I actually took my flight test with the FAA. People sometimes ask me what I would do if the engine failed, and I would just panic. No, actually, you're not supposed to panic. Unfortunately, some pilots do. But first thing you need to do is set your glide at about 65 knots for a Cessna 172. That'll give you the most distance. And then you immediately look for a place to land, because if your engine fails, you're going down. So you need to find a safe place to land. And you can always land in hay fields and stuff. And most of the time you land in a field like that, you're not going to damage the plane. You're not going to get hurt if you're used to landing on turf. But once you determine that your engine has failed, you look for a place to land. Look for a field. Set up a landing pattern. Then you can try, if you have time, try restarting the engine. You can add carburetor heat in case you have carburetor icing, and give it full throttle, full mixture, whatever, to try to restart. If it doesn't restart, then you're going to land. And if you have time, you can call Mayday, tune in 121.5 5, which is the emergency frequency, to let people know you're actually going down somewhere. And of course, then you also, if there's a chance that you're going to crash land, then you want to open your doors so that when you land, it doesn't jar the doors together so that you can't get them open. Because in case of a fire, then you'd want to get out of the plane immediately. But the important thing is not to panic and then try to make it as normal landing as possible. Most people don't know how they number runways. Each runway has a certain number, and that is based on the compass. A compass, east is 90 degrees, south is 180, west is 270 degrees, and north is 360 degrees. So depending on how that runway is aligned with the compass, for example, Madison's main runway is 18 and 36. It's running north and south. So if your pilot is cleared to land on runway 36, he'll be flying in. His directional indicator will be 360. So that's an indication that he's actually on the right runway. But it's all based on the compass. So like Maury Airport is runway 28 if you're flying to the west, and 10 if you're flying to the east. And it's all based on, if you put a compass right on top of the runway, the direction that the runway is running will be that many degrees. I think I like the whole process of flying. I like planning a flight ahead of time and then getting to the airport and walking around the plane, doing the pre-flight, checking the ailerons and the elevator and the rudder and tires and the oil and all that stuff. And then starting the plane and checking the gauges, the instruments, and then flying out of Madison, you're talking to the control tower. And flying out of Middleton, there's no control tower, so you're just communicating with other pilots that are in the area. But it's just so much fun to do that stuff. And of course, the takeoffs and landings are always fun. Sometimes they're a little tricky, but I never fly when there's too much wind. I know what my limits are, and so that I stick to that. But I just enjoy the whole process. It's just a fun hobby. Okay, during pre-flight, I start out by looking at the tires on the pilot's side. Make sure the tire's inflated. Make sure there's no hydraulic fluid leaking on the ground. Then just start walking around to the back wing and the elevators. Make sure the elevators are functioning properly, and the rudder on the tail, make sure that moves back and forth, and just work my way around, always going the same direction and doing it the same way. And check the flaps and the ailerons. Make sure the pins are in the ailerons that hold them onto the plane. And then you check the fuel. Since water is heavier than aviation fuel, it sinks to the bottom of the tank, and there's low spots in the tank where they have drains, and you drain out a little bit of fuel into this cup and look to see if there's any water in it. And I've never had a problem with water, but if there is water in there, that can be a problem. So then I climb up onto the wing and look into the fuel tank, physically look in, make sure there's fuel in there. Then I check the oil, check the fan belt, and check the propeller for any nicks or cracks in the blade. Then working my way around, check the fuel on the other wing, and again check that tire for make sure it's inflated and that there's no brake fluid leaking out. But if you always follow the same pattern, then you'll always cover the same things. If you change your direction, you might forget some things. Okay, one thing that I don't like is when there's turbulence. Of course, a little mild turbulence is okay, but on a hot, sunny day when you get these huge cumulus clouds rising and maybe a strong breeze, then it's not a good idea to go flying because it's going to be a very bumpy ride. Also, on a normal day, you can tell when you're flying if it's partly cloudy. And when you're flying where the sun is shining, you get air currents that rise, and so it kind of holds your plane up. And as soon as you get into a shadow from the cloud, there you'll have air currents moving down. So immediately you'll feel the plane drop a little bit. It's not major, but it's a little bit. Also, when you fly over land and then over water, over land you'll get air currents rising, and then you fly over the water and it'll drop a little bit just because the sun isn't warming the water the way it does the land. I like flying towards evening, early evening, when the wind usually dies down more towards the evening because the sun is lower up in the sky, so there's less heat produced too, and so you don't get air currents going up. But the wind, because it dies down in the evening, you get a much smoother ride. It's much more pleasant for passengers. Occasionally, a pilot will run out of fuel, and so you'd think that they would really be careful, because running out of fuel, it's not like in a car where you pull over and walk to the gas station. So one guy says that he will never run out of fuel, because before he flies, he fills both fuel tanks, and then he drinks 2 cups of coffee, and he knows he'll have to land and go to the bathroom before he runs out of fuel. Okay, if you're seriously interested in flying, I would encourage you to call up either Maury Airport or Wisconsin Aviation and sign up for an introductory flight. And a flight instructor will sit you down and explain different things, and then they'll take you out, set you in the pilot's seat. They'll sit in the co-pilot seat. There's dual controls, and they'll probably do the takeoff, but once you get up in the air, they'll let you take the controls. They'll explain the different gauges and instruments and different rules, and then they'll probably do the landing. But learning to fly, it's an expensive hobby. It's expensive to learn, and it takes a lot of time, and it's not easy, but in the end it's worth it, because 1 mile of highway will get you 1 mile. 1 mile of an airport will get you anywhere.